Hi there! Today's topic is going to be a little bit controversial one. I'm going to talk about why story points, in my opinion, are completely useless and why there's always better to use time-based estimates. So I've already written an article about this. I'm going to link that one down below in the comments, or rather in the description. So with that in mind, let's just jump right into the topics and see where we end up. So before we begin talking about story points, let's talk about estimations first and why we are making estimations. So if you are from a Scrum-based team, you probably have this notion that the team is the single most important entity in your organization, which is completely false. You are very important, but you are not the most important thing. So the reason why we are making estimations are for two reasons. The first is that we can calculate from the estimate the cost, what does this cost, and we can then match that towards the value that it will create. And from that we can then prioritize and say we want the things that creates the most value at the shortest amount of time first. Or we see that some things are extremely valuable but they cost too much, then we want to discard those or try to reinvent those to make them less costly. So that's the first one. We need to understand what something costs, so we need to have an estimation that actually allows us to do that. And the second thing that we need it for is for planning, so we can actually have an estimated time when this could be delivered. And estimation in themselves will not tell you when it can be delivered, it will just tell you how large it is. And usually you use that information then to place it somewhere in a delivery period. So you know that this one will be available for this release period or within this general time zone, usually a quarterly or monthly. So these two things are why we do estimates, and estimation in itself is a big topic, so I'm going to have a separate topic for that one completely. But the main point here is that these two things are not just made within the team. Sure, many teams have product owners that have their own budget, but even they have to answer to someone who has provided the budget for them. So they need to be able to motivate why they prioritize certain developments. And we also need to have this when we align between multiple projects, multiple continuous delivery team, and everything else that goes on in an organization. This is especially important if a new initiative or a new project comes in that needs to be done, and you need to see then where can I put this in time and how does that affect other things that I already have in place. So estimations is very important outside of the teams, and it's not that very important within the teams, because within the teams themselves you either have a Scrum version where you have iterations of 3 or 4 weeks, or you have a safe version where you have a 10-week plan, and so on. So they are rather short in period, and you can usually handle that with very rough or perhaps even no estimates, depending on what you are building and how that looks. And just quickly then to end the estimation part, there are 3 phases in all organizations when it comes to estimation. So you have when you are doing the ideation, when you have the ideas, you want to know, is it worth for me to pursue this idea? Should I spend more time on investigation if this is a good thing to do or not? So the first part is the ideation. We come up with the idea, when you select the ideas that this is something that we should talk about. And the second one is investigation. This is where you then take this idea and you break it down on a high level and you say, what do we need to do for this one, and roughly how expensive will it be to make it? And then the third one is when you have decided that, yes, this is of the size that I think it's worth pursuing. And so then we have the detailing. And these three stages can happen anywhere, at any levels. You can have an ideation within the team where you come up with a good idea or you get some insight from end users. And you can then take that directly to the team, and you decide together this is something that creates value. And from that, then we break it down together and we decide then how we should implement it and also in what time frame. But it can also be on a higher level when an idea can be a project or even a program. And this then will have to go through different stages of financing, because projects does not live within a fixed budget. Projects are temporary budgets and they need to have special funding for them. And that will then take them then to, you need to first do a project plan, you need to explain what the project is about or the program, and then you need to have a funding phase for it, which is the investigation phase usually. And then you end up then in detailing when the project have a go, and when it's been financed, it has been planned in the organization and it has been then dropped down to the development team to break down for detailing. So estimations are very, very, very important within an organization, especially when you grow in size. There are organizations where they don't use estimation, where they're more the type that throw shit on the wall and see what sticks, or they have more of a exploratory nature to themselves. So maybe they are more stuck in ideation and they just build prototypes and then they test those from a UX perspective, maybe even with UX research. But those are a little bit different. Those are not the kind of projects or organizations that usually work with estimation in that way anyway. They use more the time box version that you have in design. So you say you can spend this much time on this project or on this exploration. So enough about estimations. Now we understand why we're doing estimations, we know the need for it. So why would we use an arbitrary number that actually have no value outside of the team itself? Story points are not just arbitrary, they are also not following any logic. Most teams use the Fibonacci sequence, which means then that the one user story point is not, or rather two story points is not two 1 point versions. So since you don't have that scaling, so you can't really say we can take one 8-point story, which is the same size as 8 1-point stories, because it doesn't really work that way. It means that we are talking about not even estimates, really. We're talking about time slots, different boxes that we can put something in. So if you take, for example, story points as a concept, they are not definitive values. So if you take a 5 story points, a task that is 5 story points, that is not 5 story points. It's larger than 3 story points, but it's smaller than 8. So it's somewhere then between a 3 story point and 8 story points in size. This means that the value that you get from estimating with story points becomes rather pointless. You don't really know what does this mean, how large is this. That means that you cannot, from the values itself, you cannot actually make any time estimates from it, which means that you cannot derive from a cost. And you cannot plan with it because you don't know what does 5 story points or 3 story points or 8 or 13 story points mean in time. How many hours are that? And since that is what the organization usually needs, that means that story points themselves will be utterly useless. This is why everyone that works with story points in organizations where you need to plan and where you need to have a cost, they will always ask how many hours is 1 story point or how many hours is 3 story points. And this means that you will then spend time trying to translate what your story points mean in time, which again then means that why are you using story points to begin with? because then the organization have no need for it, and you will still not gain the benefit that you should have from using story points within the team. The next reason why story points are utterly useless within an organization is that they are not the same between teams. So what one team might say, this is a 2-point task, a 2-story point task, another team might call a 3, and a third team might say that's a 5. And one team can say that this is a very big task, it's a 13 point, and another would say this is a very big thing, so it's a 3 point. So that means that the value you get, even if story points could be converted to hours, it will still be different from every team. So that means that if I want to see a timeline of 35 teams, for example, using story points, then this would not work, because the story points will be basically saying like, yes, this will take 5 cucumbers and 3 giraffes. And the other team will say, yeah, this is 12 apples and 9 plums. It will have no meaning to anyone who's looking for cost and planning. So if we take this then and look at where could you possibly use a story point? Well, I don't think there is anywhere where it actually would make sense, because if you are in the situation where the organization does not need to know the cost and they don't need to plan anything, then why would you need to make an estimation in the first place? Then it would just be for the team themselves. And if that is the case, then go ahead. You can use whatever you want, t-shirt sizes, you can say apples and elephants or whatever you want, because it will just be for your team. So if you are in a small startup, for example, or a small company where, let's say you are less than 50 people and you all know each other and you work together in the same place, or if you're distributed, you talk every day, then you probably don't need to have much in terms of estimation, because you will still know what you're going to do, and it will take the time it takes. And you will also align with everyone on a daily basis within the organization. So everyone from the CEO down to the person who cleans the office, not I'm saying that that person is the lowest on the scale in any way, but probably the furthest away from the organization. And then again, why would you use story points? It will be, if you excuse the pun, pointless, because the organization would still be able to function without estimations. On the flip side, if you have an organization of, let's say, 500 or 1,000 people and up, coordinating all of those efforts, and you also have external contractors, you have projects on top of continuous delivery teams, and you need to somehow synchronize all of this, so you can also have a marketing organization, you need to have all these kinds of things that happens within an organization. Then you need to have proper time estimations, you need to be able to plan. I'm not saying that you should put static plans in place and then they will be static in any way, but you need to have the ability to plan, and you need to have the ability to have that as a conversation and work with the plans together to make the most value for the company. So story points, from my perspective, is a waste of time. I don't think it's useful. I think it is a way for teams to avoid dedicating the time to understand the problems correctly and to formulate solution designs, even if it's just verbally within the team. I think it's also something that prevents you from learning as you go along, because I have never seen anyone that takes a story point and then change it during the development phase. So it just will be a binary number, basically. We either fixed it within the time frame that we set within the story point allocation, or we didn't. While if you do time estimations, you can see how much larger or how wrong were we in our estimations, and then we can use that in our retrospective and see why did we miscalculate this so much. And some cases just Murphy and the Murphy's law. just pops up, and that's why it didn't work. In other cases, there were steps that we forget that we have to take. I often have conversations with developers that forget that they have to test, for example, in multiple browsers, and they have to have different types of tests going on that they completely ignore, and they also don't make any room for eventual defects, and so on. So, like I said, estimations is a complex topic that we'll have another video for. But for any mid-sized to large organization, you probably need to have time-based estimations. And story points, they could exist within small organizations, or you could use them, for example, when you are in the investigation phase, when you are making high-level estimations, when you're doing the rough planning for it, and when you do the rough, basically between your thumb and your pinky finger estimations, then it could fit, but you usually have t-shirt sizes there, or you do it in time even there, because people need that to present their project, for example, and say how much will this cost and what value will you generate. So story points, if you're using them, by all means go ahead. Just check with your organization if they get the information that you need or that they need, because what happens if they don't get it is that they will start trying to micromanage you, and they will start to ask you questions all the time. They will ask you to translate your story points, and there will be a lot of frustration on their end, because what you don't do in the teams, they have to do in Excel, and they have to try to figure out how to ask you so they get the values that they need to actually present and motivate their solutions or their way of spending the money. So that was a bit of a rambling regarding story points. Like I said, I have a blog post about it, an article for it that you can read, that is a little bit more structured, and also where you have some examples on why story points does not work. And if you want to see more content like this, and you want to see me rambling on more about different ways of working, and also how we connect that to Atlassian, which we didn't do in this example, then subscribe to this channel. And you should see down there now, you should see the playlist for ways of working and some suggestion on videos in the same topic that you can look at. And you probably should see up there also a link to subscribe if you want to use that. So with that, I hope you found this conversation, I guess, interesting. If you have any objections, which I'm sure many of you do, then please leave a comment. I promise you I won't be offended if you have a different opinion. It's perfectly all right to have different opinions. And also, if you would like me to talk about this in a specific way, then put that also in the comment. If you want to discuss this in more detail, then you also have the Atlassian website that you can go to, and we have a specific blog there called The Way of Working, and we'll leave links to that also in the description. And with that, I think it's the only thing that remains to say is that I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you will have a really, really good day.